British Diversity Awards Hero of the Year 2023 award. She's on the Global Diversity List for 2023. She's on the top 100 influential people in the UK 2024. After her inspiring words, get ready for an afternoon packed with fantastic entertainment right here on this stage. So stick around, enjoy, and keep the energy going all day long. Will you please welcome to the stage, Katie Neeves!
Well, hello Leicester Pride! Woo! What a build-up. I feel as if I've got to lead that now. But I've been asked to tell you a little bit about my story and then to talk about some of the challenges that trans people face in the UK today. You can probably tell from the low pitch of my voice that either I've been a heavy smoker for the last 30 years, or in fact I am transgender. Well, frankly, I couldn't cope with the sheer stigma of being labelled as a smoker, so I went for the easier option instead. But having said that, being trans isn't easy, and it's definitely not optional. No one chooses to be trans. The only choice we have is whether we are happy or not. So yes, I used to pretend to be a bloke. I was assigned male at birth, and I was given the name Martin Albert Neeves. So that was me, labelled. However, at the age of around 3 or 4, my head and my heart were telling me something very different to the label that I was given at birth. And one of my earliest memories was aged 3 or 4, was of my mum catching me trying on some of my sister's clothes. And it couldn't have been anything sexual at the time, because I was only 3 or 4, so it was way before puberty. But it was just an outward way of displaying how I felt inside. And I remember at the time, it felt right, that I felt right. But then my mum caught me and she told me off. And she told me to take them off, and for every day of the following week, she would check to make sure I was wearing all of my own clothes. And it was humiliating, but it sowed the seeds for a very long time that what I was doing was wrong, it was dirty, it was naughty, it was not what respectable people did. But however much my mum told me off about this, those feelings were still there and they would never leave me. Now, I don't blame my mum for that, for the way she reacted, because it was the early 1970s and it's just how things were then. It was only 2 years before I was born that it became partially legal for men to be gay. And it's crazy to think that it was ever illegal. But it wasn't until 2013 that homosexuality became fully legalised in the UK. And no one ever spoke about trans people when I was growing up as a kid. And I remember there was a lot of queer bashing, beating up of gay men, going on in the 70s and 80s. And gay men were being called names such as groomers, predators, paedophiles and sex pests. And guess what? Those are the very names that trans women are being called today. I get called these names so often on social media that it just doesn't even register now. Now, I had a happy childhood. Well, it was mostly happy, apart from the lifelong trauma caused by my mum cutting my hair like that on the day the school photographer came. I don't know what she was thinking about. I think the pudding basin must have slipped. But despite my mum telling me off about it when I was 3, I always felt female. And I have always had gender dysphoria, which is a mismatch between how I feel inside as opposed to the label that I was given at birth. And I've always had that inner conflict between Martin and Katie. And it increased so much that at the age of 48, I was thrown into turmoil and I didn't know what gender I was at all. This led to a traumatic journey of voyage of discovery until on the 11th of January 2018, I finally accepted that I am a transgender woman and that I need to change my body. I didn't want to be trans. No one does, as it invariably involves a lot of loss, pain and heartache, as well as dealing with bigotry and prejudice along the way. No one chooses to be trans. The only choice we have is whether to be happy or not. And I just couldn't carry on living a lie. I just had to live my truth. I made a coming out video, which I sent to the clients of all my photography business, which I then put on all my social media, go big or go home. I then started vlogging my journey to do two things. One is to reach out to other trans people to let them know that it's okay to be trans, because it really is okay to be trans. And the other thing is to educate everybody else on the subject, just to let them know that trans people are just ordinary people who want to be happy. We don't transition to be somebody that we're not. We just want to be happy, and that's it. My story was then picked up in the media, and it led to me forming Call to Be Trans, to provide trans awareness training, inspirational speaking and presenting, while supporting trans people and their loved ones at the same time. I've now been in transition for 6.5 years, and although I have a different name and a different appearance, I'm still exactly the same person on the inside, but far, far happier. I also have cravings for chocolate now too, but it's a girl thing. So even though I'm much happier living my truth, it's not all plain sailing, because there are still so many challenges for trans people in the UK and around the world. So firstly, let's look at hate crime. From 2011 to 2012, police forces in England and Wales recorded 313 incidents of trans hate crime. But in 2022 to 2023, the figure rose to 4,732. Increased discussion about transgender issues are not of our community's making, but they're driven by the last Conservative government's culture war, which has also promoted racism in the UK, aided and abetted by the gender-critical and sex-realist movements. The gender-critical movement is not a UK phenomenon, but a global movement financed by far-right and religious fundamentalist groups, often based in the UK and in Russia. There is a clear correlation between the increase in trans hate crime and the rise of the gender-critical movement in the UK, with right-wing media promoting both racism and transphobia. For example, the Daily Mail published just 6 articles about trans people in 2013. But in January 2023, it published 115 such articles, and most of them were trans hostile. Also, in the last year, The Telegraph published over 800 inflammatory articles about trans people. The rise of the gender-critical movement is often hateful. J.K. Rowling has targeted high-profile trans women, including me, to her 13 million followers on social media. When she targeted me in April this year, her hateful tweets were republished in full in both the Daily Mail and in the Sun, and it was reported in the media all over the world, including the New York Times and on TV News in Australia. I'm used to receiving hate messages every day, but nothing could have prepared me for the torrent of abuse that I received in the 2 weeks following being targeted by J.K. Rowling. And what did the police do about it? Absolutely nothing. I was nearly going to swear there, but I've been told not to. Absolutely nothing. It's no surprise that 90% of trans hate crime goes unreported. It's a waste of time. Now let's look at the puberty blocker ban for trans adolescents. After absorbing all the misinformation that has been pumped out in the media and in Parliament, many people think that the ban is a good thing, but let me debunk the myth. Firstly, puberty blockers are not new. They've been used safely for over 40 years. They are reversible, and their sole purpose is to delay the onset of puberty, allowing the young person more time before making decisions about irreversible treatment. As soon as the blockers are stopped, puberty starts. Also, doing nothing is not a neutral option. Puberty is a difficult time for most young people, but for trans youth, it's like a train crash hurtling towards them. If you force a young person to go through puberty which is opposite to their gender identity, you are forcing irreversible changes on them. Trans girls will end up with deep voices like mine, facial hair, a larger frame, a square jaw, and trans boys will end up with breasts, wider hips and a smaller frame. Some of these changes can only be corrected years later by major surgery, while many others cannot be corrected at all. I cannot begin to describe the immense anxiety that young trans people have when they are forced to go through the wrong puberty. Also, puberty blockers have been used safely for over 40 years on non-trans children who have precocious puberty, and they are usually on blockers from a far younger age than trans youth are too, with no concern. Oh, hello. Is that my cue to come off? I'm not going to sing to you, don't need to worry about that. I'll start that paragraph again. Also, puberty blockers have been used safely for over 40 years on non-trans children who have precocious puberty, and they are usually on blockers from a far younger age than trans youth are, with no concerns at all about low bone density issues for them. If they are safe for non-trans kids, why are they deemed unsafe for trans adolescents? But what about the CAS review, I hear you cry? On the face of it, it's an in-depth report by a retired paediatrician, so surely it should be respected. But all is not as it seems. Hilary Cass has no direct experience of treating trans kids, and she follows many anti-trans hate crimes on hate groups on X too. Also, she advised Ron DeSantis on how to implement the trans healthcare ban for trans youth in Florida. She was hand-picked for this job by the last trans-hostile Tory government. There were no trans people or doctors who specialise in treating trans patients in the CAS review leadership team, and most of the positive evidence presented to them was ignored, while most of the negative evidence was accepted. While the CAS review has yet to gain support from any peer reviews, it has been internationally discredited by all of the following organisations: the British Medical Association, the BMA, the American Academy of Paediatrics, the Endocrine Society, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH, Path A, Asia Path, EPATH, US Path, the Canadian Paediatric Society, the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists, the Integrity Project at the Yale Law School, the Amsterdam University Medical Centre. The CAS review is a flawed, biased, discredited political document dressed up as science, and it is doing colossal harm to young trans people. In the final day of the last Tory government, the then Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, used an emergency power to temporarily ban the sale of puberty blockers for use by young trans people. There was no parliamentary debate. She justified the ban by citing concerns highlighted by the discredited CAS review, even though CAS didn't recommend a ban. This ban has caused so much anxiety for young trans people. There have been numerous reports of parents of young trans people sleeping on their child's bedroom floor to prevent them from taking their own life. This is how serious it is. It then got worse. The new Labour Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, announced that he has just renewed the puberty blocker ban for young trans children, also citing the CAS review as justification. Again, there was no parliamentary debate, and non-trans kids can still get blockers on the NHS. This renewal of this cruel ban will cost lives. These are just two examples of injustice and prejudice against trans people. There are many more, including access to trans healthcare, legal gender recognition, and trans exclusion in sport. But I don't have time to cover all of those today. Being a trans ally is not just about accepting us for who we really are, or not subjecting us to prejudice. It's far more than that. If you consider yourself to be a trans ally, this is your moment to prove it, by actively standing up for us at every opportunity. Our fight against organised transphobia in the UK is very nearly lost, but that doesn't yet mean lost. Your time to help us is now. I'd like to end with two very, very important messages. Trans rights are human rights, and trans youth are loved. Thank you very much, Leicester Pride.